问一，加尔文一开始在处理什么核心问题？ Question 1. What core issue is Calvin addressing at the very beginning? 他在处理谁有资格被听，谁必须拒绝这个分辨的问题。 Answer. He is dealing with the question of discernment. Who is qualified to be listened to, and who must be rejected? 他指出，撒旦的差异往往披着神先知的外衣，用看似合理属灵的外表来，所以摩西早已警告百姓。He points out that Satan's agents often clothe themselves with the appearance of prophets of God, using what seems reasonable and spiritual to deceive people. And therefore Moses had long ago warned the people. 不是所有自称为教师先知的人都可以不加分辨地听从。Not everyone who claims to be a teacher or a prophet is to be followed without discernment. 真正该被信任的是经过判断被证明忠于神的人。Those who are truly to be trusted are those who have been examined and proven faithful to God. 问2. 摩西为什么这里要谈到刑罚？ Question 2. Why does Moses speak of punishment at this point? 答，因为问题已经不是单纯的错误，而是公开引导人背逆神。Because the issue is no longer a mere mistake, but the public leading of people into rebellion against God. 加尔文强调，摩西不是要处死所有教错的人。Calvin emphasizes that Moses is not calling for the execution of everyone who teaches something incorrectly, 而是针对那些假借先知之名，却实际把百姓引向背道的人。But is targeting those who, under the name of a prophet, in reality, lead the people into apostasy. 这些人不是犯了局部错误。These are not people who have committed a partial or incidental error, 而是从根基上拔除敬拜真神的信仰。But those who uproot, at the foundation, the worship of the true God. 问3. 是不是任何教义错误都会招致这样严厉的刑罚？ Question 3. Does every doctrinal error incur such severe punishment? 答，不是。加尔文明确否定这种扩张。Answer. No. Calvin explicitly rejects such an expansion. 他清楚说明 He clearly explains 只针对称为背道之使作俑者的人。Such severity applies only to those who become the instigators of apostasy, 而不是因为某些个非次要的错误 and not because of certain individual, trivial, or secondary errors. 换言之，关键不在错误本身，而在是否引人离开真神的敬拜。In other words, the decisive issue is not the error itself, but whether it leads people away from the worship of the true God. 问4. 为什么这种严厉只适用在特定时刻？ Question 4. Why does this severity apply only at a particular time? 答，因为宗教必须已经被神清楚确立。Answer. Because religion must already have been clearly established by God. 加尔文指出 Calvin points out that 这样的刑罚不是宗教尚未确立、真理仍模糊的阶段施行。Such punishment is not imposed when religion has not yet been established and truth remains unclear, 而是在神已经明明白白启示自己是谁，该如何敬拜他的情况下。But when God has plainly revealed who he is and how he is to be worshipped. 以色列人已经 the people of Israel had already 亲身经历出埃及的救赎 personally experienced the redemption from Egypt, 领受了律法的清楚教导 received the clear instruction of the law, 因此无知不再是借口。Therefore, ignorance was no longer an excuse. 问5. 为什么背道在这里被视为如此严重的罪？ Question 5. Why is apostasy regarded here as such a serious sin? 答，因为是对已充分显明之真理的公然轻慢。Answer. Because it is a public contempt for truth that has already been fully revealed. 加尔文说 Calvin says that 神已经用救赎的神迹显明他的荣耀。God has already displayed his glory through acts of redemption, 又用律法显明他的旨意 and made his will known through the law. 在这样清楚的光中 in such clear light, 人故意引人离开神的敬拜 to deliberately lead people away from the worship of God, 就是对神本身处于反叛 is blasphemy and rebellion against God himself. Hi, 问6. 加尔文如何回应用刀剑维护宗教是迷信的指控？ Question 6. How does Calvin respond to the charge that using the sword to defend religion is superstition? 答， 他区分迷信与颠覆宗教根基这两件事。Answer: He distinguishes between superstition and the overthrow of religion's foundation. 他一方面明确反对 On the one hand, he clearly opposes 用武力维护人的迷信与私造敬虔是荒谬的 The use of force to defend human superstition and fabricated piety, which is absurd. 但另一方面，他也同样清楚指出 But on the other hand, he also clearly states that 在制度健全的政体中 In a well-ordered political system, 公然颠覆宗教、破坏敬拜根基的人不可被容忍 Those who openly overthrow religion and destroy the foundation of worship must not be tolerated. 问题：那些反对这种严厉的人，加尔文怎么评价 Question 7. How does Calvin evaluate those who oppose this severity? 他指出，这些人其实在要求对悖逆行为的纵容。He points out that such people are in fact demanding tolerance for acts of rebellion. 他说 He says that 有些人之所以受不了这种教导 Some people cannot endure this teaching 是因为他们渴望可以任意制造混乱而不受约束 Because they desire to create disorder freely without restraint 所以他们反过来指控主张制止错谬的人是邪的 Therefore, they turn around and accuse those who seek to restrain error of being bloodthirsty. 问吧，神的真理真的需要刀剑来维护吗 Question 8. Does God's truth really need the sword to defend it? 答：真理本身不需要，但神有权选择使用官长。Answer: Truth itself does not need it, but God has the right to choose to use magistrates. 加尔文承认 Calvin acknowledges that 神的真理本身不靠刀剑站立 God's truth does not stand by the sword. 但他强烈反问 But he forcefully asks 人凭什么替神立法规定神不能使用官长的孙服 By what right do humans legislate for God and declare that he may not use the obedience of magistrates? 既然是神所喜悦的安排，人就无权争辩其必要性。Since this is an arrangement God is pleased with, humans have no authority to dispute its legitimacy. 问九，为什么他用偷盗、奸淫、毒害做对比 Question 9. Why does he compare this with theft, adultery, and poisoning? 答：为了显明属灵败坏的严重性，不低于身体犯罪。Answer: To show that spiritual corruption is no less serious than bodily crimes. 他指出 He points out that 偷盗、奸淫醉酒不被允许免于刑罚。Theft, adultery, and drunkenness are not allowed to go unpunished. 毒害身体尚且不得赦免。Poisoning the body is certainly not pardoned. 那么 Then 引人灵魂走向永远灭亡的行为，岂可被视为儿戏 How could actions that lead souls toward eternal destruction be treated as trivial? 问四，这律法是否适用于基督的国度 Question 10. Does this law apply to the kingdom of Christ? 答：国度属灵，但官长的责任并因此被取消。Answer: The kingdom is spiritual, but the responsibility of magistrates is not thereby abolished. 加尔文承认 Calvin acknowledges that 基督的国不属世界 The kingdom of Christ is not of this world. 福音起初不是靠刀剑建立 And the gospel was not established by the sword at the beginning. 但他否认这意味着 But he denies that this means 君王永远不能归附基督 That kings can never submit to Christ. 官长不能成为教会的保护者 Or that magistrates cannot become protectors of the church. 问 CE 以赛亚与保罗的引用在这里扮演什么色 Question 11. What role do the citations of Isaiah and Paul play here? 答：显明神早已预告官长在基督国度中的位置 Answer: They show that God long ago foretold the place of magistrates in the kingdom of Christ. 以赛亚预言君王要成为教会的养育之父 Isaiah prophesied that kings would become nurturing fathers of the church. 保罗教导为君王祷告 And Paul taught that prayers should be made for kings. 为的是在他们治理下 So that under their rule 能过敬虔平安的生活 People may live godly and peaceful lives. 这都不是偶然 None of this is accidental. 问12，温柔的基督是否否定官长的刑罚职责 Question 12. Does the gentleness of Christ nullify the magistrate's duty to punish? 答：没有。温柔不等于放任 No. Gentleness does not mean permissiveness. 基督呼召信徒效法他的温柔。Christ calls believers to imitate his gentleness. 但这不等于可以忽略他们护卫敬虔的责任。But this does not mean that magistrates may neglect their duty to guard godliness. 忽略这责任 to neglect this duty, 反而是对灵魂的残忍 is in fact cruelty toward souls. 问13若有人滥用的教导，流无辜人的血，怎么办 Question 13 What if someone abuses this teaching and sheds innocent blood? 答人的滥用不能废除神的命令 Answer Human abuse cannot nullify God's command. 加尔文明确指出 Calvin clearly states that 神的命令不可因人的败坏而失效 God's command does not lose its force because of human corruption. 真正的分别在于审判是否按神的律法施行 The true distinction lies in whether judgment is carried out according to God's law, 而不是因怕滥用就全面否定神的安排 Not in abolishing God's arrangement out of fear of abuse. 问14最后一句依法审查为何如此重要 Question 14 Why is the final phrase, examined according to the law, so important? 答它为所有热心设下界限 Answer It sets boundaries for all zeal. 加尔文总结 Calvin concludes that 这样的严厉 such severity 只适用在不敬虔已经清楚显为悖逆 applies only when ungodliness has clearly manifested itself as rebellion 并且已经被神明话语定的情况下 and has already been condemned by God's explicit word. 若没有合法合乎神话语的审查 without lawful examination in accordance with God's word 任何仓促霸道的热心 any hasty sword-drawing zeal 都必然走向错误 will inevitably lead to error.